Millionaire divorced his sick black wife. 5 years later, he applied for a loan and met his daughter as. But the phone buzzed again. This time, a photo from his brother. The Charlotte Observer's headline about their company's upcoming merger. Millions of dollars. Hundreds of jobs. A legacy that stretched back 4 generations. Have you ever walked away from someone you loved because others told you to? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. The pen trembled in his hand as he signed the divorce papers, not knowing that 5 years later, his own daughter would hold his financial future in hers. Richard Callahan stared at the hospital room that smelled of disinfectant and dying dreams. Monica lay pale against white sheets, their daughter's tiny fist wrapped around her finger like a promise he was about to break. The machines beeped steadily, marking time he didn't have. His phone buzzed. Another text from his mother. The board meeting is in an hour. Sign the papers and come home. Monica's dark eyes met his. No anger, no pleading, just the quiet acceptance that had drawn him to her 3 years ago when she was waiting tables at that downtown Charlotte restaurant. Back then, her smile could light up rooms. Now it barely flickered. You don't have to do this, she whispered, adjusting baby Danielle against her chest. But he did. His family's real estate empire hung in the balance. The Callahans had built half of Charlotte's skyline, and they wouldn't let their golden boy throw it away for love that crossed the wrong color lines. Remember when they used to make love against his penthouse windows? Her body pressed against floor-to-ceiling glass, the city lights painting her skin gold while she gasped his name. Those nights felt like a lifetime ago. His mother's voice echoed in his head. That woman and her baby will destroy everything we've built. Choose wisely, Richard. The pen scratched across paper. His signature looked like a death certificate. Monica didn't cry. She never cried. Instead, she pulled their daughter closer and said something that would haunt him for years. She has your eyes, but she'll have my strength. Someday, that combination will be dangerous. He kissed Danielle's forehead once. Her skin was soft as silk, warm as hope. Then he walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. Richard, he turned back. Monica's smile was sad but certain. I loved you. That was real, no matter what happens next. The hallway stretched endless before him, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry wasps. Nurses moved past, their shoes squeaking against linoleum. Normal people living normal lives while his world split in two. In the parking garage, he sat in his BMW for 20 minutes, hands shaking on the steering wheel. He could go back, tear up the papers, face his family's rage and the board's fury. But the phone buzzed again. This time, a photo from his brother. The Charlotte Observer's headline about their company's upcoming merger. Millions of dollars. Hundreds of jobs. A legacy that stretched back 4 generations. He started the engine. 3 blocks away, he pulled over and threw up in a gas station bathroom. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a stranger wearing his face. Have you ever walked away from someone you loved because others told you to? Have you chosen approval over your heart? Tell me in the comments if you faced that impossible choice. 5 years would pass. 5 years of building skyscrapers that touched the clouds while his soul lived in the basement. 5 years of one-night stands with women who looked nothing like Monica, tasted nothing like forgiveness. He never called, never wrote, never sent money. But every night, he dreamed of tiny fists and promises broken before they could grow. Back in that hospital room, as his footsteps faded down the hall, Monica whispered to their sleeping daughter, "Daddy doesn't know it yet, baby girl, but someday you're going to be the one deciding his fate." The machines kept beeping. Time kept moving. And somewhere in Charlotte's gleaming towers, a man who had everything learned what it meant to have nothing at all. Success tastes like ash when every skyscraper you build reminds you of the family you tore down. Richard Callahan stood in his corner office, watching the sun set over Charlotte's skyline. Every building told a story. The bank on 5th Street, his first major deal. The luxury condos on Tryon, his biggest profit margin. The medical plaza on Independence Boulevard, the one that made him think of Monica every damn day. 5 years. 5 years since he'd walked out of that hospital room, and the guilt still ate at him like cancer. His assistant knocked. "Mr. Callahan, your 8 o'clock is here. Another business dinner." Another blonde with perfect teeth and empty eyes who'd laugh at his jokes and pretend his money didn't matter. He loosened his tie and grabbed his jacket. The restaurant was one of those expensive places where silence costs extra and the waiters moved like ghosts. She was already seated, Jessica or Jennifer or something starting with J. They always had names that sounded like soap opera characters. "Richard," she stood, air-kissing both his cheeks. "You look amazing." He didn't feel amazing. He felt hollow, like someone had scooped out his insides with a spoon and left only the shell behind. Dinner passed in a blur of small talk and smaller thoughts. She talked about her yoga classes, her charity work, her upcoming trip to France. He nodded at the right moments, smiled when expected, played the part of Charlotte's most eligible bachelor. Back at his penthouse, she pressed against him in the hallway, her perfume too sweet, her hands too eager. When she kissed him, he tasted expensive lipstick and disappointment. "Your bedroom?" she breathed against his neck. But when he closed his eyes, he saw Monica. Not this stranger with her designer dress and practiced moves, but Monica in her hospital gown, holding their daughter like she was made of starlight. "I can't." He pulled away. "I am sorry. I can't do this." She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. "Are you serious?" He was dead serious. Because every woman he touched felt wrong, tasted wrong, moved wrong. They weren't her. They'd never be her. After she left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, he poured 3 fingers of bourbon and stood on his balcony. The city spread below him like scattered diamonds, each light a life he'd never touch, a story he'd never know. His phone sat silent on the marble countertop. He'd memorized Monica's old number years ago, but every time he'd reach for it, cowardice won. What would he say? Sorry for choosing money over love? Sorry for abandoning our child? Sorry for being exactly the man you knew I was? The bourbon burned going down, but not as much as the memory of Monica's voice. "I loved you." That was real. Real. When was the last time anything in his life felt real? The penthouse was a museum of expensive things that meant nothing. Italian leather furniture no one sat on. Art that cost more than most people's houses, hanging on walls that echoed with loneliness. A kitchen where he ate takeout alone because cooking for one felt like admitting defeat. His bedroom was the worst. King-sized and empty, sheets that smelled like nothing, pillows that had never known the weight of a woman who stayed till morning. Sometimes he slept on the couch just to avoid the space where love should have lived. At 2 a.m., the phone rang. Unknown number. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Richard." The voice was shaky, familiar. Monica's sister, Angela. His heart stopped. "Angela." "She's gone, Richard." The words hit like bullets. Monica died 3 days ago. The cancer came back, and it was fast. She didn't want me to call you, but... The phone slipped from his fingers, crashing to the marble floor like his world crashing down around him. Monica was gone. The woman he'd loved and left, the mother of his child, was gone. "There's something about Danielle you need to know." Angela's voice continued from the broken phone, but he was already falling to his knees, chest splitting open with pain he'd buried for 5 years. What's the difference between success and fulfillment? Can you have everything and still have nothing? Share your thoughts below. Outside, Charlotte slept peacefully, unaware that in a penthouse high above the streets, a man was finally paying the price for choosing gold over love. And somewhere in Atlanta, a young woman who had his eyes and her mother's strength was about to change his world forever. He walked into that bank as a king seeking his next kingdom. He walked out as a man facing his greatest judgment. The Meridian Bank building rose from downtown Charlotte like a glass and steel prayer, all sharp edges and clean lines. Richard Callahan straightened his Italian silk tie and checked his Rolex. 11:15. Right on time for the meeting that would secure funding for his biggest project yet, a $100 million mixed-use development that would cement his place as the South's premier real estate mogul. His reflection in the lobby's polished marble showed a man who'd conquered the world. Custom-tailored suit, silver hair, perfectly styled, confidence that cost 6 figures to maintain. The kind of man banks love to do business with. Mr. Callahan, the receptionist's smile was professionally warm. Ms. Monroe will see you now. Conference room C. He followed her down a hallway lined with photographs of Charlotte's growth over the decades. Buildings he'd constructed stared back at him from gilt frames, monuments to his success and his emptiness. Conference room C smelled like leather and ambition. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city where he'd built his empire on the ashes of his heart. He was reviewing his presentation notes when the door opened. "Mr. Callahan? I'm Danielle Monroe, Senior Loan Officer." Time stopped. The woman in the doorway wore a charcoal business suit that couldn't hide curves that belonged to Monica. Her hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but a few strands escaped to frame a face that made his chest tight. High cheekbones, full lips, skin the color of coffee with cream. But it was the eyes that killed him. His eyes, blue-green like stormy seas, staring at him with an intelligence that felt dangerous. "Ms. Monroe." His voice came out steady, but his hands shook as he stood. "Thank you for meeting with me." She moved with liquid grace to the chair across from him, spreading his financial documents on the mahogany table like a general planning war. 23 years old, according to her business card. The same age Danielle would be now. It couldn't be, couldn't possibly be. But when she looked up, studying his face with the same intensity he was studying hers, recognition flickered between them like lightning before a storm. "Your development proposal is ambitious," she said, her voice carrying Monica's slight southern accent. $100 million is significant money, even for someone with your track record. The bank's marble floors reflected fluorescent light like ice, and across the mahogany desk sat a young woman whose eyes held Monica's fire, but burned with a cold intelligence that was entirely her own. "I've been doing this for 20 years, he said, trying to focus on business instead of the way her fingers moved across his credit reports. Long, elegant fingers that reminded him of Monica playing piano in his apartment, back when music filled spaces that money never could. "Yes, I can see that." She pulled out a thick folder. "Callahan Development has an impressive portfolio, though I notice a gap in your charitable contributions to community organizations." The comment felt loaded, like a bullet in a chamber. "I prefer to focus on profitable ventures." Her smile was ice-cold beautiful. "Of course. Profit over people. That seems to be your specialty." The words hit like a slap. She knew. Somehow, this stunning professional woman with his eyes and Monica's fire knew exactly who he was and what he'd done. "Ms. Monroe, have we met before?" "Not formally." She leaned back in her chair, and for a moment, her professional mask slipped. Underneath was raw pain and barely controlled rage. "But I know your work, Mr. Callahan. I know exactly what kind of man you are." The air between them crackled with tension that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with blood, abandonment, and 23 years of questions that had never been answered. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache. Not just because she looked like Monica, but because she looked like him too. The stubborn set of her jaw, the way she tilted her head when thinking, the unconscious confidence that came from Callahan DNA. "I'll be reviewing your application personally," she continued, her voice dropping to something that sounded like a promise and a threat. "Every detail, every number, every decision you've made over the past 5 years. Have you ever come face to face with a consequence you thought you'd escaped? That moment when the past crashes into the present? Tell me about it." The meeting lasted another hour, but he heard nothing after that. Numbers blurred together. Contracts became meaningless symbols on paper. All he could focus on was the young woman across from him who held his financial future in hands that looked like Monica's, but moved with his own calculated precision. When she stood to end the meeting, she was all business again. Professional handshake, cool smile, polite words about processing times and approval procedures. But as he reached the door, she spoke again. "Mr. Callahan?" He turned back, hope and terror warring in his chest. When she said, "I'll be reviewing your application personally," her smile was Monica's, but her tone promised reckoning. The elevator ride down felt like falling. 20 floors of descent, while his world tilted off its axis and his carefully constructed life crumbled around him. In the lobby, he leaned against a marble pillar and tried to breathe. Outside, Charlotte moved at its usual pace, but inside that glass tower, time had stopped at the moment he looked into eyes that were his own, set in a face that belonged to the woman he'd loved and lost. Danielle, his daughter, the baby whose fist had wrapped around Monica's finger like a promise he'd broken. And now she held his empire in her hands. She had spent 23 years preparing for this moment. He had spent 5 years running from it. Danielle Monroe sat alone in conference room, long after Richard Callahan's expensive cologne had faded from the air. His business file lay open on the mahogany table like evidence at a crime scene. Bank statements, credit reports, property records that told the story of a man who built towers while tearing down hearts. Her hands trembled as she flipped through documents that represented more money than her neighborhood in Atlanta had seen in decades. While she and her mother scraped together rent money and skipped meals to pay for medication, this man, her father, was buying mansions and yachts like other people bought coffee. The conference room walls seemed to close in as she slid his business file across the table, his entire financial life reduced to papers, just like he'd reduced her mother to his signature on divorce documents. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant. "Your 2 p.m. canceled. You okay in there?" No, she wasn't okay. She was drowning in memories that felt like knives. Age 5, asking why she didn't have a daddy like other kids. Monica's careful explanation. Some men aren't ready to be fathers, baby girl. But that doesn't mean you're not perfect. Age 10, finding the divorce papers in her mother's jewelry box. His signature bold and final across the bottom, like he couldn't wait to erase them from his life. Age 16, watching Monica work 3 jobs while fighting cancer, too proud to ask for help from a man whose child support checks never came. And now, at 23, she finally had power over the man who'd wielded power over her entire existence. The door opened. Richard stood there, looking older than he had an hour ago, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there during the meeting. His perfect composure cracked like expensive paint. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "Do you?" She leaned back in her chair, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. "Because for 23 years, you seemed pretty unclear on the concept." He stepped into the room and closed the door. In the enclosed space, she could see the man her mother had loved, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes that probably used to hold warmth before money froze them over. "You look like her," he whispered. "I look like you too." She stood, facing him across the table that suddenly felt like a courtroom. "Your eyes, your stubborn chin, your talent for walking away when things get difficult." The words hit their target. He flinched like she'd slapped him. "Danielle Dash. Ms. Monroe. We're not family, Mr. Callahan. Family doesn't abandon each other in hospital rooms." Power flowed through her like electricity. For the first time in her life, she held all the cards while he stood empty-handed, begging for mercy he'd never shown. "Your mother, how is she?" The question broke something inside her chest. She'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed cruel words that would cut him down to size. But she hadn't prepared for the genuine pain in his voice when he asked about Monica. "She's dead." The words fell between them like stones into deep water. He staggered backward, grabbing the edge of the table for support. "When?" "6 months ago." "Cancer." She watched his face crumble and felt a savage satisfaction that scared her. "She fought it for 3 years. Worked until 2 weeks before she died because we couldn't afford for her to stop." "I didn't know, Dash. You didn't want to know." Her voice rose, professional composure finally cracking. "You signed those papers and erased us like we never existed. Do you know what that does to a child? What it does to a woman who loved you enough to let you go?" Tears she'd held back for years threatened to spill. She blinked them away, refusing to show weakness in front of the man who'd made weakness a luxury she couldn't afford. "What would you do if you had power over someone who hurt your family? Revenge or forgiveness? Drop your choice in the comments." "I thought about calling," he said, his voice broken. "Every day, for 5 years, I thought about calling. But you didn't." "No, I didn't." The admission hung in the air between them, honest and devastating. She opened her desk drawer and pulled out an envelope sealed with wax, old-fashioned, like something from another century. Monica's careful handwriting across the front. For Richard, when the time is right. She wrote this the day before she died. About you. About us. About what she never told you. His eyes fixed on the envelope like it contained salvation or damnation. Wouldn't she tell me? Danielle's smile was sharp as broken glass. She'd held this secret for 6 months, waiting for exactly this moment. The moment when she could return some of the pain he'd given them. That's not how this works. You want answers? You want forgiveness? You want any chance of getting that $100 million loan approved? She leaned forward, close enough to see her reflection in his eyes. Then you got to earn it. Some words reach across the grave to slap you awake. Monica's letter was a resurrection and a reckoning. Richard's fingers shook as he broke the wax seal on Monica's letter. 23 years since he'd seen her handwriting, but he'd recognize it anywhere. Careful loops and curves that looked like music made visible. The same handwriting that used to leave love notes on his bathroom mirror, grocery lists shaped like poems. The conference room felt like a tomb. Outside, Charlotte's afternoon traffic hummed along, but inside this glass box, time had stopped at the moment of his greatest judgment. Danielle sat across from him, her face unreadable as stone, waiting, watching, ready to witness whatever resurrection or damnation her mother's words would bring. He unfolded the cream paper, and Monica's voice spoke to him from the grave. Richard, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and our daughter finally decided you were worth the truth. I'm proud of her for making you wait. Lord knows you've had enough things come easy. I loved you until my last breath. Not because you deserved it, but because love isn't about deserving. It's about choosing every day to see the best in someone even when they can't see it themselves. You were scared. I get that now. A poor black girl from Atlanta and a rich white boy from Charlotte. We were walking into a storm, and you weren't strong enough to weather it. I was angry for a long time, but anger is just love with nowhere to go. Monica's handwriting flowed across cream paper like music made visible, each word a knife wrapped in silk, cutting him open with love he didn't deserve. You need to know about Danielle. She's brilliant, Richard. Graduated top of her class, got a full scholarship to UNC, turned down 3 job offers from bigger banks because she wanted to come to Charlotte. She wanted to understand where she came from. She has your stubbornness and my heart. Dangerous combination. She's been saving money for 2 years to find you. Not for a reunion. For revenge. I tried to talk her out of it, but you know how Callahan blood runs. Stubborn as winter. His chest tightened. Across the table, Danielle's expression hadn't changed, but he could see Monica in the way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her head when she was thinking hard about something. But here's what you don't know. What I never told her, you try to come back. Richard's eyes widened. Danielle leaned forward. 2 weeks after you signed those papers, you showed up at my apartment with flowers and apologies. I was so angry I wouldn't let you in. Told you we were fine without you, that your money was dirty and your love was too little, too late. You stood in that hallway for an hour, begging me to let you be a father. I watched through the peephole while you cried. First time I'd ever seen you cry. But I was hurting too much to forgive, and pride is a poison that kills love slow. You came back 3 more times that month. Left money I was too proud to take, gifts I returned unopened, letters I burned without reading. I was so busy protecting my heart that I forgot to protect our daughter's future. The words blurred as tears he'd held back for 5 years finally broke free. He remembered those nights, sitting in his car outside her apartment building, watching her windows for signs of forgiveness that never came. The returned gifts, the unopened letters, the silence that felt like death. By the time I swallowed my pride enough to call you, you changed your number. Your assistant said you were unavailable. I was too proud to keep trying, and you were too hurt to try again. We failed each other, Richard. Both of us. But Danielle paid the price. He looked up at his daughter, God, his daughter, and saw tears tracking down her cheeks despite her efforts to stay strong. You try to come back? Her voice was barely a whisper. Every day for a month, he said, his own voice breaking. Your mother wouldn't see me. Monica's letter continued. I'm telling you this not to divide the blame, but to heal the wound. Danielle grew up thinking you didn't want her. You've lived thinking I wouldn't let you back. We were both wrong, and we were both right. Love her, Richard, not as penance for abandoning us, but because she's the best of both of us wrapped up in a woman who's stronger than we ever were. She doesn't need your money. Lord knows I made sure she could stand on her own feet. But she needs your father. And maybe, if you're very lucky, you need her too. With love that time couldn't kill, Monica. P.S. She's not just your daughter, Richard. She's your equal. Treat her like it. The letter fell from his hands like autumn leaves. Silence filled the room until it felt heavy as grief. If someone you hurt forgave you after death, would that make it harder or easier to forgive yourself? What would you do with that grace? Danielle wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, professional composure finally completely shattered. She never told me you tried to come back. She was protecting you. From me. From disappointment. He stood on unsteady legs, decades of regret, making him feel ancient. Can you forgive an old fool who chose pride over love? She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her mother's wisdom in eyes that were his own. I don't know, she said honestly. But maybe we can figure out together. The letter's final line made his knees buckle. She has her father's eyes and her mother's strength. Don't let her use one to destroy the other. Outside the conference room windows, Charlotte glittered in the afternoon sun. Somewhere in the city, construction crews were building new towers that would scrape the sky. But in this small glass room, a father and daughter were finally building something that mattered more, a bridge across 23 years of broken promises and buried love. The healing would take time. Trust would have to be earned in installments, like payments on a debt too large to settle all at once. But Monica's words had done what she'd intended. They'd given two stubborn, wounded people permission to try again. She held his empire in her hands, but he held something more dangerous, the ability to make her feel like the little girl who once waited by the window. The restaurant hummed with Charlotte's elite, crystal and candlelight creating intimacy that neither wanted, conversations swirling around them like sharks sensing blood in the water. Danielle had chosen this place deliberately. The Metropolitan, where his family dined, where deals were made over wine that cost more than most people's rent. Your loan application, she said, sliding the folder across white linen, requires additional documentation. Richard's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside, mixed with legitimate bank forms, were photographs. Him signing the divorce papers. Monica in the hospital bed. A birth certificate with his name crossed out in red ink. What do you want from me? His voice barely carried across the table. What I wanted was a father. She lifted her wine glass, studying the red liquid like blood. What I'm offering is a business arrangement. The waiter approached, all smiles and southern charm. Everything tasting wonderful tonight. Perfect, Danielle replied without breaking eye contact with Richard. My companion was just telling me about his family values. After the waiter retreated, Richard leaned forward. Danielle, please. I know I failed you. I failed your mother. But this won't bring her back. You think this is about bringing her back? She laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. This is about justice, Mr. Callahan. Pure and simple. Around them, Charlotte's power brokers continued their evening rituals, oblivious to the war being waged at table 12. A city councilman's wife waved from across the room. Richard managed a weak smile in return. The loan approval process, Danielle continued, her voice steady as a surgeon's blade, typically takes 6 to 8 weeks. But given your unique circumstances, I'm prepared to expedite things. In exchange for what? She reached into her purse, withdrawing a sealed envelope. These are my terms. You'll find them quite reasonable, considering. His fingers brushed hers as he took the envelope, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. She jerked her hand back as if burned, color rising in her cheeks. Read it later, she said quickly. When you're alone. Richard studied her face, seeing Monica's bone structure beneath features that were somehow entirely her own. The way she tilted her head when thinking. The slight accent that crept in when she was emotional. His daughter, the child he'd never held, never read bedtime stories to, never taught to ride a bike. You look like her, he whispered. Don't. The word cracked like a whip. Don't you dare romanticize what you threw away. But something had shifted in her expression, vulnerability flickering beneath the armor. For just an instant, she looked exactly like what she was, a young woman playing with fire, testing her power against a man who'd already proven he could walk away from everything. The terms are simple, she continued, recovering her composure. Full disclosure of all your assets. A complete audit of your business practices. And she paused, savoring the moment. You're going to make things right with the people you've stepped on building your empire. And if I refuse? Her smile was Monica's, but her tone promised reckoning. Then you'll discover just how much influence a motivated loan officer can have on a developer's future prospects in this city. The threat hung between them like smoke. Richard had built his fortune on reading people, understanding their pressure points. But sitting across from his own daughter, this brilliant, wounded woman who'd grown up hating his name, he felt completely outmaneuvered. There's something else, she said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Tomorrow morning, you're coming with me to Atlanta. You're going to see what your money could have saved. Danielle, I don't think dash. It wasn't a request. She stood gracefully, every eye in the restaurant following her movement. Even furious, even plotting his destruction, she commanded attention like her mother had, that natural magnetism that made rooms go quiet. As she moved toward the exit, she paused beside his chair, leaning close enough that her perfume made him dizzy. And Richard? That's not my name anymore. Monica made sure I understood that men like you don't get to name the children they abandon. She was halfway to the door before he found his voice. What should I call you then? She looked back over her shoulder, and for one heartbreaking moment, he saw the little girl who'd grown up without him. The woman who's about to change her life forever. The restaurant returned to its evening rhythm as she disappeared into Charlotte's glittering night, leaving Richard alone with an envelope that felt heavy as judgment and a wine glass still warm from her lips. He drove through neighborhoods where his money could have built palaces, seeing instead the ruins of his absence. The West End stretched before them like a story written in broken concrete and stubborn hope, where beauty grew through cracks in the pavement like wildflowers refusing to surrender. Danielle sat silent in the passenger seat of his Mercedes, directing him through streets that his GPS couldn't seem to locate, as if this part of Atlanta existed in some parallel universe his technology couldn't reach. Turn here, she said softly, pointing toward a street where children played between abandoned lots and grandmothers sat on porches like sentries guarding what remained of their kingdom. Richard had driven through neighborhoods like this before, always with his windows up, air conditioning running, seeing poverty as something that happened to other people. Today, with Danielle beside him and Monica's memory heavy in the air, every boarded window felt like an accusation. This is where she raised me, Danielle said as they pulled up to a small house with peeling paint, but a garden that could have graced any magazine cover. My grandmother's place. Mama lived here until... She didn't finish the sentence. An elderly woman appeared on the porch, moving with the careful dignity of someone who'd learned to make little look like much. She studied Richard through the windshield with eyes that had seen everything and forgiven most of it. That's Big Mama, Danielle said, already opening her door. She's been waiting 23 years to meet you. The introduction felt like standing trial. Big Mama's handshake was firm, her gaze direct, her judgment immediate and absolute. So you're the man who broke my baby's heart, she said without preamble. Well, you're here now. That's something, I suppose. Inside the house, every surface told Monica's story. Photographs of her pregnancy, her graduation from community college, her work at the clinic. And everywhere, pictures of Danielle growing up, first steps, school plays, graduation, college acceptance letters. All the moments he'd missed reduced to frames on somebody else's walls. She never said a bad word about you, Big Mama said, watching Richard study a photo of 5-year-old Danielle in an Easter dress. Even when the bills were past due and the electricity got cut off, she'd tell that baby, "The daddy's a good man who made a hard choice." Richard's throat closed. I didn't know about the bills. Of course you didn't. Monica was too proud to come begging. But she never stopped believing you'd find your way back to what mattered. They walked through the neighborhood like ghosts visiting their former lives. Danielle showed him the corner store where Monica worked nights, the clinic where she'd volunteered, the church where she'd sung in the choir every Sunday. Each location was a monument to the woman he'd loved and abandoned, the life they could have built together. She used to bring me here, Danielle said, stopping at a small park where children played on equipment held together with prayer and determination. Every Sunday after church, she'd push me on the swings and tell me stories about my father, the man who built beautiful buildings and had gentle hands. Richard watched a young father pushing his daughter on those same swings, the little girl's laughter bright as church bells. I wanted to come back so many times, but you didn't. No, I didn't. They found Monica's grave as the sun was setting, painting Atlanta's skyline gold and crimson. The headstone was simple granite with words that cut deeper than any elaborate monument. Monica Washington, beloved daughter, mother, and friend. She loved without conditions. Richard knelt beside the grave, his expensive suit collecting red Georgia clay. I'm sorry, he whispered to the stone, to the memory, to the daughter standing behind him with tears streaming down her face. God, Monica, I'm so sorry. Danielle knelt beside him, and for the first time since their reunion, they were simply two people mourning the same loss. She forgave you years ago, she said quietly. I'm the one who couldn't let it go. You have every right to hate me. I know. She placed a single white rose on the grave. But hating you didn't bring her back. It just made me like the people who kept you away from us in the first place. The cemetery fell quiet around them. Atlanta's distant traffic, a gentle hum beneath the weight of 23 years of grief and regret. Richard looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not just Monica's features but something entirely her own. Strength that came from surviving, wisdom that came from loving despite loss, grace that came from choosing forgiveness over fury. What happens now, he asked. Danielle stood, brushing dirt from her knees. Now you prove whether you're still the man who walked away, or if you finally become the father she always believed you could be. As they walked back to his car, she whispered words that stopped his heart. Mama, I think I understand now why you never stopped loving him. The drive back to Charlotte passed in silence, both of them lost in thoughts too deep for words. But when they reached the city limits, something had changed between them. The war wasn't over, but the first ceasefire had been declared in a cemetery where love lay buried but not forgotten. She expected him to write a check and disappear. Instead, he offered something that terrified her more: permanence. The community center's empty gymnasium echoed with their voices as blueprints spread across folding tables like maps to a future neither had imagined building together. Richard had arrived that morning with architects, engineers, and plans that transformed Danielle's modest development dreams into something magnificent. This is too much, she said, studying designs that would turn 6 city blocks into a thriving community hub. I asked for a small development loan, not. She gestured at the elaborate drawings. Not this. Your mother deserved this, Richard replied, adjusting a blueprint corner. You deserve this. The community deserves this. They've been working since dawn, and Atlanta's summer heat was turning the old gymnasium into a sauna. Danielle had long since abandoned her business suit for jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look impossibly young. Richard had rolled up his sleeves, loosened his tie, and for the first time in years, felt like he was building something that mattered. The medical clinic goes here, he explained, pointing to the central building. Full service, pediatrics, women's health dental. And here, his finger moved to another section: job training center, computer skills, trade programs, small business development. You've thought of everything, Danielle said, but her tone wasn't entirely pleased. Except asking what the community actually wants. What do you mean? She moved around the table, studying his face. You're doing it again, aren't you? Making decisions for other people, assuming you know what's best. The accusation hit like cold water. Richard set down his pen, really listening for the first time in hours. You're right. I'm sorry. Tell me what they need. They need to be part of the process. They need to feel ownership, not charity. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. Mrs. Johnson has been running an informal daycare out of her kitchen for 15 years. Carlos fixes cars in his backyard and trains kids in auto repair. Sister Mary teaches reading to adults every Tuesday night in the church basement. As she talked, her whole demeanor changed. This wasn't the cold, calculating loan officer who'd confronted him at the restaurant. This was someone who genuinely cared about her community, who saw potential where others saw problems. So we build around what's already working, Richard said slowly. We don't replace, we expand. Exactly. Her smile was the first genuine one she'd given him. You might actually understand after all. They worked through lunch, redesigning spaces to incorporate existing community strengths. The daycare would expand into a proper child care center. Carlos would run the automotive training program. Sister Mary would head adult education. There's something else, Danielle said as afternoon shadows lengthened across the gym floor. Something I need to know before we go any further with this. Richard looked up from the blueprint he'd been modifying. What? Why are you really doing this? Is it guilt? Some kind of tax write-off? A way to buy forgiveness? The question hung between them like a challenge. Outside, children played in the parking lot, their voices drifting through open windows. Inside, dust motes danced in slanted sunlight, and Richard felt the weight of 23 years of wrong choices pressing down on his chest. All of those reasons, he said finally, and none of them. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I can give. He walked to the window, watching the kids play. I can't undo the past. I can't bring your mother back. I can't give you the childhood you deserved. But maybe I can give you something else, which is a future where other kids don't grow up without fathers because those fathers are too scared to fight for what matters. When he turned around, Danielle was staring at him with an expression he couldn't read. Surprise? Hope? Fear? Maybe all three. You're talking about staying, she said carefully. Being involved long-term. I'm talking about being the father I should have been 23 years ago. It doesn't work that way, Richard. You can't just decide to be my father now. No, he agreed. But maybe I can decide to be someone worth knowing. They were standing closer now, close enough that he could see flecks of gold in her dark eyes, could smell the faint scent of her perfume mixed with sawdust and hope. For a moment that lasted forever, they weren't father and daughter or loan officer and client. They were just two people who'd found something unexpected in the ruins of old pain. There's a community meeting tomorrow night, she said softly. If you're serious about this, you'll need to face them. All of them. Answer their questions, hear their concerns. And if they don't want my help, then you'll have to prove you're different from every other wealthy developer who's promised them everything and delivered nothing. As they began packing up the blueprints, their hands accidentally brushed, reaching for the same corner. The contact was electric, immediate, wrong in ways that made them both step back quickly. I should go, Richard said, his voice rougher than intended. Yeah, me too. But neither moved for several heartbeats. The gymnasium suddenly feeling smaller, warmer, charged with something neither dared acknowledge. When they finally locked up together, walking to their separate cars in the purple twilight, Danielle's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced at it, her expression shifting from neutral to concerned to something approaching fear. What is it? Richard asked. Community member, she said, showing him the screen. Someone doesn't want outside money in the neighborhood. Says developers like you bring nothing but trouble. Richard read the message, noting its hostile tone and implicit threat. Do you know who sent it? No, but she looked around the empty parking lot, suddenly aware of how isolated they were. Maybe I should follow you back to Charlotte tonight. Stay at my place, he said immediately. I have plenty of room. The offer hung between them, loaded with implications neither wanted to examine. Danielle looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Just for tonight, she said. As they drove back to Charlotte in separate cars, both tried to ignore the feeling that everything between them had just shifted on a dangerous ground. The heart doesn't read DNA. It only recognizes what feeds the soul, even when that recognition could destroy everything. Rain trapped them in his penthouse as Atlanta's storm clouds followed them to Charlotte. Windows fogging as conversation turned dangerous, every word heavy with things that couldn't be said. Richard had offered her the guest room, shown her where everything was, then retreated to his study with a bottle of whiskey and a growing awareness that having her in his space felt both completely natural and utterly wrong. She'd changed into one of his shirts after her clothes got soaked in the dash from the parking garage, and seeing her curled up on his couch in white cotton that barely reached her thighs was doing things to his mind that no father should experience. The shirt hung loose on her smaller frame, but couldn't hide the curves underneath, curves that reminded him painfully of Monica in their early days. "Tell me about her," Danielle said from across the living room, cradling a cup of coffee in both hands. "About how you two met." Richard looked up from his whiskey, grateful for a safe topic. "She was working at a gallery downtown, part-time while finishing college. I was there for some corporate function, probably trying to impress clients with culture I didn't understand. And she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Not just physically, though she was stunning. She had this light about her, like she saw magic in things other people took for granted." Outside, thunder rolled across Charlotte's skyline, and rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the penthouse felt like a cocoon, separate from the rest of the world. "She told me once that she fell in love with your hands first," Danielle said quietly. Richard looked down at his hands wrapped around the whiskey glass. "My hands," said they were gentle for someone who built such hard things. "Strong but careful. She used to trace them while you slept." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Monica, lying beside him in the early morning light, her fingers following the lines of his palms like she was reading his future. "How do you know that?" "She told me everything. Every detail of your relationship. It was like she needed to keep it alive through stories." Danielle's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Including the night I was conceived." Richard's whiskey glass stopped halfway to his lips. "Danielle, the thunderstorm, just like tonight. You two got caught in the rain walking back from dinner. Made love for the first time in your old apartment while lightning lit up the room. She shouldn't have told you that. Why? Because it makes me real. Because it proves I was created from love, not just biology." She stood up from the couch, the shirt riding higher on her thighs as she moved toward the window. Richard tried not to look, try not to notice the way the fabric clung to her body. Try not to think about how much she looked like her mother at the same age. "Do you know what it's like," she said, pressing her palm against the glass, "to grow up knowing your parents loved each other desperately, but that love wasn't strong enough to keep you together?" "Danielle, it wasn't about strength. It was about fear, about being too weak to fight for what mattered." She turned to face him, and in the lightning's glow, she looked so much like Monica that his breath caught. "And now? Are you still too weak?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither should cross. Richard set down his whiskey and stood, drawn toward her despite every instinct screaming at him to maintain distance. "What are you asking me?" "I don't know." She laughed shakily, running her hands through her hair. "That's the problem. I don't know what I'm asking or what I'm feeling or why being near you makes me feel like." "Like what?" "Like I understand why she never stopped loving you." They were closer now, close enough that he could see the pulse beating at her throat, could feel the heat radiating from her skin. This was his daughter, the child he'd abandoned, the woman who'd grown up hating his name. But in this moment, with rain making the world disappear around them, she was also something else entirely. "This is wrong," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Because right now, you don't feel like my father. You feel like..." She reached up, her fingertips barely brushing his cheek. "Like someone I've been waiting my whole life to find." The touch was electric, sending shock waves through his entire system. Richard caught her hand, holding it against his face, feeling her warmth seep into his skin. "We can't," he whispered, even as his thumb traced across her knuckles. "Can't what?" "Can't feel this? Can't admit that there's something between us that has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with recognition." She stepped closer, close enough that her body was almost touching his, close enough that he could smell her skin and feel her breath. Tell me you don't feel it too. Richard closed his eyes, fighting a battle he was rapidly losing. You're Monica's daughter. I'm also my own person. A woman who's attracted to a man who makes her feel alive for the first time in her life. When he opened his eyes, she was looking at him with an expression that was pure want, uncomplicated by anything except desire. Not revenge, not manipulation, not even the complex tangle of their shared history. Just simple, honest attraction between two people who'd found something unexpected in the ruins of old pain. Danielle. She rose on her toes, bringing her lips close enough to his that they were sharing the same breath. Just once, she whispered, just to see if it's real. The kiss was inevitable, gentle at first, tentative as a question. But when she melted against him, when her arms wrapped around his neck and she made a soft sound of approval, gentleness became hunger. She tasted like coffee and rain and something uniquely her own, something that reminded him of Monica, but was entirely different. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, both staring at each other with a mixture of wonder and terror. Oh God, Danielle whispered, her fingers touching her lips. What did we just do? I don't know, Richard replied, his forehead resting against hers. But it felt right. It felt right. They stood there in the lightning's glow, holding each other while rain washed the city clean outside. Neither spoke of the implications. Neither acknowledged the line they just crossed. For this one perfect, impossible moment, they were simply two people who'd recognized something in each other that the rest of the world might never understand. But outside the penthouse windows, a camera clicked in the darkness, capturing images that would change everything. Some boundaries exist for good reason. Others are just society's way of controlling what it doesn't understand. Danielle couldn't sleep. She lay in Richard's guest bed staring at the ceiling, her lips still burning from a kiss that had rewritten everything she thought she knew about herself. Down the hall, she could hear him moving around. As restless as she was, both of them afraid to examine what had happened and more afraid to ignore it. At 3 a.m., she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen for water. She found him there, still dressed, staring out at Charlotte's sleeping skyline with a glass of whiskey untouched in his hands. Can't sleep either? She asked softly. He turned, and even in the dim light, she could see the war raging behind his eyes. Danielle, about what happened? I know. You regret it. No. The word came out sharper than intended. That's the problem. I don't regret it. I should, but I don't. She moved closer, her bare feet silent on the cold marble. Then what are you thinking about? About how wrong this is. About what people would say. About the fact that you're supposed to be my daughter, and instead I'm standing here wanting to touch you again. The honesty in his voice made her stomach flutter. What if I told you I've been researching something? What kind of something? Instead of answering, she pulled out her phone and showed him a series of documents. Birth certificates, medical records, DNA ancestry results I ordered last week. Richard's face went pale as he scanned the information. What is this? Proof that Monica lied about one very important thing. She took the phone back, her hands trembling slightly. You're not my biological father, Richard. The words hung between them like a revelation and a revolution combined. Richard stared at her, then at the phone, then back at her face as if seeing her for the first time. That's impossible. The timing, the way you look. I look like Monica. And Monica had a relationship with your business partner, David Chun, about 6 months before she met you. She was already pregnant when you two got together. David, Richard's voice was barely a whisper. But he died in that construction accident. Before Monica could tell him about me. She was scared, alone, and then she met you. A successful, kind man who fell in love with her and accepted her pregnancy without question. Danielle's voice grew stronger. She let you believe I was yours because she loved you, because she wanted us to be a family. Richard collapsed into a kitchen chair, the information hitting him like a physical blow. So when my family pressured me to choose, you were choosing between their approval and a woman who loved you enough to give you a ready-made family. A woman whose only lie was wanting to protect everyone she cared about. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of rain against windows and the whisper of lives being rewritten. Finally, Richard looked up at her with eyes that were seeing her completely differently. "You're not my daughter," he said, as if testing the words. "No, I'm not." "Then what are you?" She moved toward him slowly, like approaching something wild that might bolt. "I'm Monica's daughter, and David's, and I'm a woman who's been drawn to you since the moment we met, for reasons that have nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice." When she reached him, she placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the tension coiled there like springs. "I'm also someone who spent 23 years believing in a lie, and who's finally free to feel whatever this is between us." Richard's hands came up to cover hers, his thumbs stroking across her knuckles. "The things I felt, the guilt about being attracted to you, were based on a story Monica created to protect everyone she loved. But the truth is simpler." She leaned down until their faces were inches apart. "We're two people who found each other in the most complicated way possible, and now we get to choose what comes next." The kiss was different this time, hungrier, free from the weight of taboo. Richard pulled her down onto his lap, and she melted against him like she'd been made to fit there. His hands tangled in her hair, hers traced the strong line of his jaw, both of them surrendering to something that felt inevitable. "Are you sure about this?" He stood, lifting her with him, and she wrapped her legs around his waist as he carried her toward his bedroom. They didn't speak during the walk down the hall. There was nothing left to say except yes. In his room, with city lights painting patterns on the walls and rain providing a gentle soundtrack, they made love with the desperate intensity of two people who'd been denied permission to want each other. Every touch was revelation. Every kiss was freedom from rules that had never applied to them anyway. When Richard's mouth found hers, she tasted liberation from a prison she'd built from other people's expectations. "We're not." She breathed against his lips. "I know," he whispered back, his hands mapping her body like territory he'd waited a lifetime to explore. "But we are something else entirely." Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and moonlight, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to love each other without apologizing for it," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "People won't understand. People don't have to. This is our story, not theirs." She lifted her head to look at him, seeing not the man who'd abandoned Monica, not the father figure she'd grown up resenting, but simply the person who made her feel complete for the first time in her life. "I love you," she said, the words simple and clean and true. "I love you too," he replied, admitted in ways that had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with choice. Outside their window, dawn was beginning to paint Charlotte's skyline pink and gold, promising a new day for their impossible, perfect love. Neither of them noticed the camera across the street, its telephoto lens capturing images through their bedroom window, images that would soon rewrite their private happiness in a public scandal. But for now, in the soft morning light, they held each other close and believed that love really could conquer all the rules the world had tried to build around their hearts. The camera sees everything but understands nothing. It captured their passion but missed their love. The photographs appeared online at exactly 7 a.m., time for maximum damage when Charlotte's business elite will be checking their phones over morning coffee. The headline screamed across every social media platform. "Banking scandal. Loan officer's intimate relationship with client exposed." But the pictures told a story the headlines couldn't capture. Two people who'd found each other against impossible odds. Richard's phone had been buzzing since dawn. By the time he dragged himself from the warmth of Danielle's sleeping form, he had 47 missed calls and over 200 text messages. His business partners, his lawyer, his publicist, all asking the same question. What the hell was he thinking? "Richard," Danielle's voice was soft, confused by his absence from the bed. He turned from his phone screen, tried to shield her from the storm that was about to break over their heads. "We need to talk." She sat up, pulling the sheet around herself, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" Instead of answering, he handed her his phone. He watched her face change as she scrolled through the images, intimate shots of them in his penthouse, kissing by the window, walking to his bedroom, wrapped in each other's arms. "Oh God," she whispered. "How do they get these?" Long telephoto lens. Probably from the building across the street. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair. "Danielle, this is going to get ugly." Fussed. As if on cue, his phone rang. The caller ID showed his business partner's name. Richard declined the call, but it immediately rang again. And again. "Answer it," Danielle said quietly. "You can't hide from this." "Richard, what the hell is going on?" Marcus's voice was sharp enough to cut glass the moment Richard accepted the call. "The entire board is an emergency session. The photos are everywhere. Please tell me there's an explanation that doesn't involve you sleeping with a bank employee while negotiating a loan." "It's complicated, Marcus." "Complicated? Richard, this looks like corruption at best, and something much worse at worst. Do you understand what this does to our company? To every project we have pending?" Through the phone, Richard could hear voices in the background. Other board members demanding answers, legal counsel discussing damage control, publicists calculating the cost of scandal. "I need you to trust me," Richard said. "Give me 24 hours to explain everything." "Trust you?" "Richard, I've known you for 15 years, and I don't understand what I'm looking at here. The woman in these photos looks young enough to be your daughter." The word hung in the air like a curse. Danielle flinched, pulling the sheet tighter around herself. "She's not," Richard said firmly. "And I'll prove it. But I need time." "You don't have time." The story's already picked up by 3 major news outlets. Channel 9 is camped outside your building. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution is running an investigative piece on banking ethics. And that's just the beginning. Richard ended the call and immediately dialed his lawyer. No answer. He tried his publicist. Straight to voicemail. His accountant, his insurance agent, his gym. Every number in his contacts seemed to lead to the same result. Silence. "They're all backing away," he said, more to himself than to Danielle. She was already getting dressed, moving with the quick efficiency of someone preparing for battle. "What did you expect?" In their eyes, "You're either corrupt or worse." "And in your eyes?" She paused, one arm halfway into her blouse. "In my eyes, you're the man I fell in love with. But that doesn't change what we're facing." The intercom buzzed, security calling from the lobby. "Mr. Callahan, there are reporters downstairs. They're asking to speak with you about the banking story." Richard looked at Danielle, seeing his own determination reflected in her dark eyes. "Tell them no comment. And increase building security. No one gets up here without my explicit permission." "This is just the beginning," Danielle said, buttoning her blouse with steady hands. "When they dig deeper, they're going to find out about Monica, about your family's reaction to your relationship with her. They're going to paint this as a pattern. Let them dig. They'll find the truth eventually. Will they? Or will they find a story that sells papers?" She moved to the window, looking down at the news vans gathering like vultures. "Richard, there's something you need to understand. I've been the local banking officer handling community development for 3 years. My reputation is everything in that job. If people think I traded favors for this, it doesn't just destroy me. It destroys every project I've worked on, every family I've helped get loans, every business I've supported." The weight of consequences he hadn't considered crashed down on him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to decide right now. Do we run from this, or do we fight?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Mr. Callahan, this is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 9 News. We have video footage of you and Ms. Washington at various locations over the past week. We'd like your comment before our 6 p.m. broadcast." "They have video too," Richard said, showing Danielle the message. She read it, then looked up at him with eyes that held no trace of fear. "Then we better make sure our story gets told before they tell theirs." "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we go on the offensive. We tell the truth, all of it. About Monica, about the DNA results, about finding each other. We control the narrative instead of letting them write it for us." Richard stared at her, seeing not the young woman he'd first met in the bank, but a fierce warrior who'd learned to fight from growing up in a world that tried to count her out. "That's a hell of a risk," he said. "Everything worth having is." She moved toward him, taking his face in her hands. "But I'd rather fight beside you than hide from what we are." Outside, more news vans were arriving, and Richard's phone continued buzzing with calls from numbers he didn't recognize. The storm was just beginning, but looking into Danielle's eyes, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: the courage to stand and fight for what mattered most. "Okay," he said, "let's give them a story they'll never forget." He built an empire with his hands, but was ready to tear it down with his heart. The boardroom where he'd conquered deals for decades became his execution chamber. Each signature on liquidation papers a nail in his empire's coffin, each document a declaration of what mattered more than money. Richard's business partners sat around the mahogany table like judges, their faces masks of disappointment and barely contained fury. "This is insanity," Marcus said, pushing another contract across the polished surface. "You're talking about dissolving 25 years of work over a woman you've known for a week." "I've known her for 23 years, Richard replied, signing his name with steady strokes. "I was just too blind to see it." "The DNA results don't change the optics, Richard. The public doesn't know she's not your biological daughter. All they see is what appears to be an inappropriate relationship that compromises every deal we've ever made." Outside the conference room windows, Charlotte's skyline stretched toward the horizon. Buildings that bore his company's signature, developments that had transformed neighborhoods, projects that had employed thousands. His life's work reduced to assets on a spreadsheet. "The bank board is demanding Danielle's resignation," said Jennifer, the company's legal counsel. "They're claiming conflict of interest, potential fraud, violation of ethics policies. If you continue this relationship, her career is over." Richard set down his pen and looked around the table at people he'd considered friends for decades. "What you're asking me to do is choose between the woman I love and the approval of people who were never there when it really mattered." "We're asking you to be rational," Marcus shot back. "One woman versus everything you've built. Your reputation, your legacy, your financial future." "My father gave me the same choice 23 years ago," Richard said quietly. "I chose the money then. I chose approval over love. And you know what I got for it? 23 years of regret and a daughter who grew up hating my name." He stood, walking to the window that overlooked the city he'd helped shape. Below, traffic moved like blood through arteries, people going about their lives unaware that empires rose and fell on decisions made in rooms like this. "I'm not making that mistake again." The signatures took 2 hours. Dissolution of partnerships, transfer of assets, liquidation of holdings. With each document, Richard felt lighter, as if he was shedding weight he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. His partners tried alternately reasoning with him, threatening him, and finally begging him to reconsider. "You'll have nothing," Jennifer warned as he signed the final paper. "No company, no steady income, no safety net." "I'll have love," Richard replied. "That's more than I've had in years." Meanwhile, across town, Danielle was fighting her own battle. The bank's conference room felt smaller than Richard's boardroom, but no less hostile. Her supervisor, the regional manager, and 2 executives from corporate headquarters sat across from her like a firing squad. "Ms. Washington," the regional manager began, "these allegations are extremely serious. Not only do they suggest conflict of interest, but they raise questions about every loan decision you've made in the past year." "The loan application was handled according to standard procedures," Danielle replied calmly. "Every document is properly filed, every requirement met. There was no preferential treatment, except for the personal relationship," one of the corporate executives said, sliding a tablet across the table showing the photographs that had started everything. Danielle looked at the images without flinching, her and Richard kissing by the window, walking together, looking at each other with obvious affection. "My personal relationships are not the bank's concern unless they interfere with my professional duties," which they didn't. "The optics alone are enough to damage our reputation," her supervisor said. "We're recommending immediate resignation. We'll provide a positive reference, and there won't be any formal disciplinary action on your record. And if I refuse, then we'll be forced to conduct a full investigation. Every loan you've approved will be reviewed. Every client relationship will be scrutinized. Even if we find no wrongdoing, your career in banking will be over. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Danielle thought about the families she'd helped buy their first homes, the small businesses she'd supported with startup loans, the community projects that depended on her advocacy. "I need time to consider my options," she said finally. "You have until 5 p.m. today," the regional manager replied. "After that, the decision will be made for you." That evening, Richard and Danielle met at his penthouse, both carrying the weight of impossible choices. The news vans had multiplied outside his building, turning the street into a media circus. "They want me to resign," Danielle said, collapsing onto his couch. "If I don't, they'll investigate every loan I've ever approved. It could destroy years of work helping people in my community." "They want me to end this publicly," Richard replied, pouring himself a drink he didn't want. "Claim it was a misunderstanding, distance myself from you, rebuild my reputation, keep everything I've built." They sat in silence, watching the city lights twinkle below them like stars fallen to earth. Both knew what the smart choice was, what the safe choice was, what everyone expected them to choose. "I liquidated everything today," Richard said finally. Danielle's head snapped up. "What?" "The company, the partnerships, the development projects. All of it." He sat beside her, taking her hands in his. "I chose you. Over everything else, I chose you." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Richard, you shouldn't have done that. Your life's work. My life's work was supposed to be building something that mattered. Turns out, I was building the wrong thing." He wiped away her tears with his thumb. "The only thing that matters is sitting right here. But your money, your security, I have enough saved to start over. To build something new, something better, something we build together." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "The bank will destroy me if I stay with you. Then we'll find another way. Start our own development company. Focus on community projects, affordable housing, the things you care about." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "The things I should have been caring about all along." Outside, the media continued their vigil, waiting for a story that would define them both. Inside, they held each other close and chose love over everything else the world had to offer. From the ashes of his old life grew something neither money nor power could create: hope in human form. The small town of Asheville welcomed them like a deep breath after years of holding their lungs tight. Mountain air cleaning away Charlotte's judgment and Atlanta's whispers. 6 months had passed since the scandal broke. 6 months of rebuilding not just their lives, but themselves. The modest house they'd bought overlooked the Blue Ridge Mountains, and every morning, Danielle stood on the porch watching sunrise paint the peaks gold while Richard made coffee in their tiny kitchen. "Any regrets?" she asked one morning, settling beside him on the porch swing with her hands wrapped around a warm mug. Richard looked at her in the early light, hair loose around her shoulders, wearing one of his old T-shirts, her body beginning to show the gentle curve of early pregnancy. "Only that it took me so long to figure out what really matters." The pregnancy had been a surprise, discovered during a routine doctor's visit when they'd finally gotten health insurance sorted in their new town. Danielle had been terrified to tell him, afraid he'd see it as another complication in their already complicated story. Instead, he'd swept her into his arms and spun her around their living room like they were kids themselves. "I called Dr. Martinez yesterday," she said, sipping her coffee carefully. "Everything looks good. Healthy heartbeat, measuring right on schedule. Boy or girl? Too early to tell. Does it matter?" Richard placed his hand on her still small belly, amazed by the life growing there. As long as they're healthy and know they're wanted, that's all that matters. Their new life was simple in ways Richard had forgotten were possible. He'd taken a job with a local construction company, learning to work with his hands again instead of just directing others. The pay was a fraction of what he'd earned as a developer, but he came home each evening tired in a way that felt satisfying instead of exhausting. Danielle had found work at a nonprofit that helped families navigate mortgage applications and financial planning. The salary was modest, but the work fed her soul in ways her bank job never had. She spent her days helping people achieve dreams instead of managing corporate policies. Mrs. Henderson called yesterday, Danielle said, rocking the swing gently. The loan went through. She'll be able to buy her house. Mrs. Henderson was 72, a widow trying to downsize from the family home where she'd raised 5 children. Banks had turned her away because of her age and fixed income, but Danielle had found a program designed for seniors and walked her through the application process. "That's wonderful," Richard said. "You made that happen. We made that happen." Your construction contacts helped her understand what repairs she could afford to make. Remember, it was true. Their work had become intertwined, Richard providing practical knowledge about housing while Danielle navigated the financial side. They were building something together that felt more meaningful than anything either had accomplished alone. "There's something else," Danielle said, pulling an envelope from her pocket. "This came yesterday." Richard recognized the letterhead immediately. Monica's sister in Atlanta. They'd maintained contact, sharing updates about their new life and the coming baby. "She wants to visit," Danielle said, "when the baby comes. She says Monica would have wanted to be a grandmother, and this is the closest she can get." The invitation touched something deep in Richard's chest. In the months since leaving Charlotte, they'd been largely cut off from family. His relatives had made their disapproval clear, and Danielle's extended family had been unsure how to handle their unconventional relationship. The idea of having someone who'd loved Monica witness their child's first days felt like a gift. "What did you tell her?" "That she's welcome anytime. That this baby will know about their grandmother, about the woman who made our love possible by loving both of us first." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the mountains change color as the sun climbed higher. A neighbor waved from across the street. Joe Martinez, whose family had immigrated from Mexico and built a successful landscaping business. In Charlotte, Richard might have known his name, but never his story. Here, they'd spend evenings on Joe's porch sharing beer and dreams while their wives planned community garden projects. "I have news too," Richard said. "Remember that low-income housing project we talked about? The one on the east side of town? The city council approved it. Better. They want us to lead it. Both of us. You handling the financial planning and eligibility, me managing construction. It's not huge money, but it's steady work doing something that matters." Danielle turned to face him fully, her eyes bright with excitement. "Richard, that's amazing. 50 families could have their own homes. 60 if we design it right. And there's talk of adding a community center, maybe some small business space." It was the kind of project they dreamed about during long nights in their Charlotte penthouse, when the future seemed impossibly complex. Now, sitting on their porch in a town that accepted them for who they were rather than judging them for who they'd been, it felt simply perfect. "Have I mentioned that I love you?" Danielle asked, leaning over to kiss his cheek. "Only every day. And I love you too." Inside the house, the phone rang. Probably another family needing help with loan applications or Richard's construction supervisor calling about the day's work. The simple demands of their simple life, each one a thread in the tapestry they were weaving together. "Should we get that?" Richard asked. "In a minute," Danielle replied, settling back against his shoulder. "Right now, I want to sit here with my family and watch the world wake up." Family. The word still amazed him. Not the family he'd been born into or the one society expected, but the one they'd chosen to create. Him, Danielle, and the baby growing under her heart. Built on love instead of obligation, choice instead of chance. As the sun climbed higher over the mountains, painting their new world in shades of gold and possibility, Richard realized he'd finally learned the difference between success and happiness. Success was what he'd built in Charlotte, impressive from the outside but hollow within. Happiness was this moment, this woman, this simple morning that held more joy than all his accumulated wealth ever had. The phone stopped ringing, then started again. Real life calling them back from their perfect moment. But that was okay. They had a lifetime of mornings ahead of them, a lifetime of building something worth keeping. The last secret was the one that made all the others make sense. Monica's final gift was the truth about where Danielle really came from. The letter in Monica's sister's trembling hands held 24 years of secrets, each revelation redrawing their family tree and explaining love that had transcended every rule. Sarah had arrived in Asheville that morning, drawn by news of the pregnancy and carrying information she'd promised Monica she would only reveal when Danielle found true love. "She made me swear," Sarah said, settling into their living room with the careful movements of someone bearing precious cargo. "She said this truth was too dangerous to tell unless you'd found someone who loved you enough to face it." Richard and Danielle sat together on their couch, his arm around her shoulders, both sensing that whatever Sarah had come to share would change everything they thought they understood about their story. "Monica kept more secrets than just letting you believe Richard was your father," Sarah continued, opening the envelope with reverent care. "The truth about David Chun, about why she never told him about you, about why she chose Richard instead." "What about David?" Danielle asked quietly. "He wasn't just Richard's business partner. He was his best friend since college. Closer than brothers, Monica used to say. And he was married." The words hit like cold water. Richard straightened, memories flooding back. David's frequent business trips, his growing distance from his wife, the way he'd changed in those final months before the accident. "Monica was working at the gallery part-time," Sarah continued, reading from notes written in Monica's careful handwriting. "David was there for some corporate event, just like Richard would be later. But David was there first. They had an affair," Danielle said. "It wasn't a question. They fell in love. But David wouldn't leave his wife, and Monica was too proud to be anyone's secret. When she found out she was pregnant, she never told him. She couldn't bear to be the other woman breaking up a marriage." Richard felt the pieces of a puzzle he'd never known existed clicking into place. The construction accident happened 3 days after Monica decided to tell him about the baby. She'd finally worked up the courage, had arranged to meet him, and then Sarah's voice broke slightly. "Then he was gone. So when she met Richard," Danielle began. "She was grieving the love of her life and carrying his child. But Richard was kind and gentle, and he fell for her so completely that she started to believe maybe she could have a different kind of happiness." The room fell silent except for the mountain breeze moving through their open windows. Outside, their neighbor was mowing his lawn, the ordinary sound of life continuing while their understanding of the past reshuffled itself completely. "Why didn't she tell me any of this?" Richard asked finally. Sarah pulled another paper from the envelope, a letter addressed to him in Monica's handwriting. "She tried. This was written the week before you signed the divorce papers." Richard took the letter with hands that weren't quite steady. The paper was soft with age, worn at the edges as if it had been handled many times. "My dearest Richard," he read aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you're reading this, then Sarah has finally told you the truth I never had the courage to share. Danielle is not your biological daughter, but she is your daughter in every way that matters. You chose to love her before she was born, chose to love me when I was carrying another man's child, chose to be the father David never got the chance to be." Tears blurred his vision, but he continued reading. "I know your family pressures you to choose between their approval and our love. I know they see me as beneath you, see our baby as a burden. But I also know that the man I fell in love with is stronger than their prejudice, braver than their small minds." He paused, wiping his eyes before continuing. "I'm writing this to tell you that if you choose to leave us, I will understand. The child I carry deserves a father who wants her completely, not one who feels trapped by circumstance. But if you choose to stay, if you choose to be her father by choice rather than biology, then she will be the luckiest little girl in the world." "There's more," Sarah said gently when Richard's voice failed him completely. Danielle took the letter, her own eyes streaming. "I pray that someday, when she's old enough to understand love that defies convention, she'll find someone who chooses her the way I hope you'll choose us. Love that transcends biology, that creates family from intention rather than accident. You taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses to love even when it's difficult. The letter is dated 3 days before the divorce, Sarah explained. She never sent it because she decided that making you choose wasn't love, it was manipulation. She wanted you to stay because you wanted to, not because she convinced you with words. Richard looked up at Danielle, seeing her with completely new understanding. So, when you found me at the bank, I was looking for the man who'd abandoned the woman I thought was carrying his child. But what I found was the man my mother loved enough to set free, hoping he'd find his way back when he was ready. And David was the biological father who never got the chance to choose us, Danielle replied. But you were the father who did choose us, just 23 years too late. They sat in their living room, holding hands while Sarah finished sharing Monica's secrets. How she'd followed Richard's career from afar, proud of his success, but hoping he'd remember what really mattered. How she'd raised Danielle with stories about her father, who built beautiful buildings, knowing that someday they might need each other. She planned this, Richard realized. Even dying, she was still trying to bring us together. Monica always said that love finds a way, Sarah replied, carefully folding the letters back into their envelope. Even when it takes 23 years and breaks every rule society sets up. As afternoon shadows lengthened across their living room, the three of them sat quietly processing revelations that reframed everything. Monica hadn't been a victim of circumstance. She'd been an architect of love, building bridges across time and convention that would eventually bring two wounded souls together. What do we do with all this? Danielle asked finally. We honor it, Richard replied, his hand moving to rest on her belly where their child grew. We love each other the way she loved us, completely, intentionally, without apology. And we make sure this little one knows the whole story, Danielle added. About all the love that went into creating our family, all the choices that brought us here. Outside their window, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to stories of love that transcended every boundary. Inside their home, three people sat surrounded by the truth that love really could conquer all, not by force, but by patience, persistence, and the courage to choose each other again and again until the choosing became as natural as breathing. They say love conquers all, but sometimes love is all, and that's more than enough. The nursery overlooked mountain ranges that stretched toward infinite possibilities, walls painted not with corporate logos, but with dreams drawn in crayon and hope spelled in children's handwriting. Richard stood in the doorway holding their 3-month-old son, watching Danielle arrange flowers in the vase that sat on the windowsill. White roses like the one she'd placed on Monica's grave. He looks like you, she said, moving to stand beside them, her finger tracing their son's tiny features. He looks like his grandfather, David, Richard replied, seeing the Asian features that were already emerging alongside Monica's bone structure. And he has his grandmother Monica's eyes. They'd named him David Marcus. David for the biological grandfather he'd never meet. Marcus for the strength they'd found in each other. The name told their story in 2 simple words. Heritage and choice, biology and family. Love that honored the past while embracing the future. The past year had transformed them both in ways neither had expected. Their community development company was small but thriving, specializing in affordable housing projects and community centers that served real needs rather than generating maximum profit. Richard's construction experience, combined with Danielle's financial expertise, created partnerships that actually helped people instead of just enriching developers. Mrs. Patterson called this morning, Danielle said, settling into the rocking chair Richard had built with his own hands. The community center is officially opening next month. 60 families have moved into the housing development, and there's a waiting list for Phase 2. Not bad for a couple of fallen angels, Richard replied, kissing the top of their son's head. Their love story had become legend in Asheville. The banker and the developer who'd given up everything for each other, then rebuilt their lives around service instead of success. The local newspaper had done a feature on their work, carefully avoiding the scandal that had driven them from Charlotte and focusing instead on the positive impact they were having on their adopted community. There's something I want to show you, Danielle said, reaching into the drawer of the changing table and withdrawing a letter. This came yesterday. Richard recognized the letterhead immediately, his former law firm in Charlotte. His hands tightened protectively around their son as he imagined what news might be coming from his old life. "It's not bad news," Danielle said quickly, seeing his reaction. "Read it." The letter was from Marcus, his former business partner, written in the formal language of legal documents, but carrying an undertone of something that might have been apology. "Richard," he read aloud, "I hope this finds you and your family well. I'm writing to inform you that the community development project in West End Atlanta, the one you proposed before your departure from our company, has been approved for city funding. The project planners specifically requested that we contact you about returning to lead the development, citing your original vision and community connections." He looked up at Danielle, seeing his own surprise reflected in her eyes. "They want us back? Keep reading. We recognize that our response to your personal choices was driven more by fear than wisdom. The success of your work in Asheville has demonstrated that your priorities have shifted toward projects that matter, and we believe this Atlanta development would benefit from that perspective. If you're interested in discussing a consulting arrangement that would allow you to maintain your current lifestyle while contributing to this project, please contact our office." Richard set the letter down, overwhelmed by the validation and the opportunity it represented. The West End project had been his dream before the scandal broke, a chance to honor Monica's memory by revitalizing the neighborhood where she'd grown up. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it's perfect timing," Danielle replied. "David Marcus will be old enough to travel soon, and I've been wanting to take him to see his grandmother's neighborhood. The project would be massive, 50 units of affordable housing, a medical clinic, job training center, and community gathering space. Everything Richard had originally envisioned, but with the community input Danielle had taught him to prioritize. "We could split our time," he said, warming to the idea. "Asheville as our home base, Atlanta for the development project. Build something that honors everyone who made our family possible. Monica, David, Big Mama, even your family who taught us what we didn't want to become," Danielle agreed. "Turn our pain into purpose." They spent the afternoon planning, holding their son between them while they sketched rough designs for a project that would bridge their past and their future. By evening, they decided to accept the consulting offer, with the understanding that they would do the work their way. With community involvement, environmental sustainability, and profit sharing for residents. "One more thing," Danielle said as they prepared dinner together in their small kitchen. "I called Sarah today. She wants to move to Atlanta to be closer to the project. Says Monica would have wanted to see the neighborhood rise again. And she'll be closer to her great-nephew," Richard added, bouncing David Marcus gently while Danielle cooked. "About that," Danielle said, her tone suggesting more news. "Dr. Martinez confirmed what I suspected. David Marcus is going to be a big brother." Richard nearly dropped their son. "You're 8 weeks. I wanted to be sure before I told you." He set the baby in his carrier and swept Danielle into his arms, spinning her around their tiny kitchen like he had when she'd told him about the first pregnancy. "How many kids do you want?" he asked, setting her down and framing her face with his hands. "As many as we can love completely," she replied. "As many as we can raise to understand that family is about choice, that love is about showing up, that legacy isn't what you build for yourself, it's what you build for others." That night, after dinner and baby's bedtime routine, they sat on their porch watching stars emerge over the mountains. Richard held Danielle close, both of them processing the day's revelations and possibilities. "Do you ever wonder what Monica would think about all this?" Danielle asked. "I think she'd be proud," Richard replied. "We took the love she gave us and multiplied it, made it bigger than just the 2 of us. 3 of us, soon to be 4. A family built on intention instead of accident, choice instead of obligation." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "That's the kind of legacy worth leaving." In the distance, a train whistle echoed through the mountains, carrying its own cargo of dreams toward unknown destinations. Inside their small house, a baby slept surrounded by love, and another child grew beneath his mother's heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to choose love over fear, service over success. But tonight, on a porch overlooking mountains that had witnessed countless love stories, Richard and Danielle held each other close and marveled at the family they'd created from the ashes of old pain. They'd learned that love really could conquer all, not by force, but by persistence, patience, and the courage to keep choosing each other until the choosing became as natural as breathing. The heart, they'd discovered, recognizes its home long before the mind understands the address. And home, for them, was wherever they chose to love without apology, build without ego, and create something larger than themselves from the simple decision to show up for each other, day after day, choice after choice.